All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jorge Acosta Palmer, and I'm the director of the statewide training initiative with Florida Legal Services. We're excited to have you join us today for Disability Application Basics for Children and Youth. Before I introduce our speakers, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded, so if you registered, you're going to receive an email from Zoom within about 24 hours with a copy of the recording, the link to the materials, and the CLE code as well. If you've somehow missed registration, we will also be posting it on YouTube within about 24 hours. And the YouTube video, I also include in the description. I will also include the CLE code and the link to the materials folder as well. So this training was approved by the Florida Bar for 1.5 general CLE credits and 1.5 juvenile law certification credits. I'll drop the CLE code into the chat towards the end of the presentation, and I will also include that code in the YouTube description and in the Zoom email. If any of you need a certificate of completion or attendance, please email me after the webinar. I'll start hammering those out as they come in. I will be out tomorrow and Friday, so if I, for whatever reason I can't get to those today, I will probably get to those next week. So if you don't see a reply from me, that's probably why. So I did add this time around a link that I'll share for the monthly series, so you can bookmark that link, and you will also always find the link for the YouTube playlist for all the recorded videos, and you will also find the list of the upcoming webinars for this series. Closed captions are enabled for anybody that needs them, so if you're having any issues with accessibility, just let me know, and I'll make sure, reach out to me directly via email or chat, and I'll make sure that you can access the captions. And final piece of housekeeping announcements are questions and answers. I'm familiar with this topic, so I know we will all have a lot of questions. So this time around, we will probably stop at some point during the presentation to answer some questions. So try to use the Q&A feature. That way the questions are pending there. And when we get to them, if we stop, I'll make sure we read them out loud for everybody to be able to hear them and their address. So a lot of you are already familiar with this. So if you could technically use the chat, but it's a lot easier to keep track of questions if you use the Q&A feature on Zoom. So I guess I said final piece of housekeeping announcements, but I do have one more. This training is being co-hosted by the Public Interest Law section and Florida Children's First. So with the Public Interest Law section, or PILS, if you're not familiar, I will drop a bunch of links into the chat. Please check out the membership benefits. If you're an attorney or a law student, there are a lot of work groups with PILS. In particular, there's the Children's Rights Work Group led by Robin Rosenberg with Florida Children's First. It's probably one of the most active work groups that we have at PILS, so definitely worth taking a look. And Florida Children's First is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, independent advocacy organization committed to protecting and advancing the rights of children and youth impacted by the child welfare, juvenile justice, and disability systems through systemic reform, education, youth voice, and promoting high quality legal representation. I'm going to drop a link for the Florida Dependency Law Center. This is a project of Florida Children's First in partnership with Florida Loves Children. There are a lot of free resources and tools for judges and lawyers handling dependency and delinquency cases. So be on the lookout for those links. I'll be dropping them into the chat. And with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Erica, I know in the next slide you have your bios. Our first speaker is Erica Herring, a dedicated child welfare attorney with more than a decade of experience. Erica joined Florida Children's First in 2025. Erica began her legal career as an Equal Justice Works Fellow for the Legal Aid Society of the Orange County Bar Association in 2009, providing holistic representation to foster children with developmental disabilities. She was also responsible for recruiting and training pro bono attorneys, lay volunteers, and community partners on a local, statewide, and national level. Erica graduated from the University of Central Florida with a bachelor's in general business administration and graduated magna cum laude from the FAMU College of Law, where she was managing editor of FAMU's Law Review. Patricia Alton is our other speaker. Patricia is a partner with Alton and Kengro, a firm she and her husband started in 2010. She once had lofty ideals of making a living at lawyering. Her first job after law school working for the state paid less than she had made as a part-time web developer. When they moved back to Pinellas to begin private practice, she took cases in bankruptcy, wills, and family law. It was her first dependency pro bono case representing a 4-year-old, and realizing that getting to play adults with kids was an option when child welfare became her passion. She has directly represented around 400 to 450 kids in the dependency system and immigration, as well as hundreds of parents. Patricia is the author and illustrator of three children's books, which requires her to keep the day job of lawyering to pay to publish and give away her books. She graduated cum laude from the University of Florida Levin College of Law, where she served as executive communications editor to the Florida Law Review. Her note on the Genetics Information Non-Discrimination Act, published in April 2009 edition of Florida Law Review, was much drier but sold more copies than her three children's books combined. So, with all of that, it's my absolute pleasure to pass it over to our speakers. Erica, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is just a quick, just to talk about, sorry about that, talk about today's agenda, right? So what are we going to talk about today? Because this is a topic we could do a multi-day training on, but we're not going to. We're going to do the highlights, and hopefully answer all of your questions. Although I do want to take a moment to say that for this one training, we do not have Robin Rosenberg live answering questions because she's out saving the world. So because she's out saving the world, we're going to do our very best answering questions live. That's why we added a couple more Q&A slides. And if there's any question that we cannot answer on our training today, I promise, I will get back to all of you by early next week. If it's anything we have to research. So here we go. Today we're going to talk about identifying the need, right? What are the purpose of Social Security benefits? And then what is the process if a youth comes into the child welfare system already receiving the benefit, right? Like that's a little bit different than when we apply for them while they're in the system. And then some tips for advocacy in and out of the courtroom, right? Which I know is important for all of us depending on our role. Then I'm going to take over from Patricia. So Patricia's going to handle that part. Then I'm going to take over just the application for benefits. Like, what does it look like? What is the process? What is the timeline? So what happens if the application is approved? What happens if the application is denied, right? And then we'll talk about the redetermination. I probably have the most angst. I know this sounds weird to say about the redetermination process because it involves our youth who are transitioning, 18, becoming adults, but have needs. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then I'll also talk a little bit about the adoption of children with benefits in as related to child welfare. Then I'll turn it over back to Patricia to talk about the adult SSI application. And then we've already chatted a little bit about how we're handling the Q&A. So without further ado, I'm turning it. Oh, one more thing before I turn it over to Patricia. The beautiful, beautiful artwork that you see throughout the presentation, the really beautiful stuff, that is her stuff. The stuff that looks like some kid kind of like drew with a pencil, that's my stuff. But I just wanted to say a special shout out, thank you to Patricia for not only providing such wonderful artwork that we're able to use, but also for your time in putting this presentation and also your time today. We are so eternally grateful to you. And with that, I turn it over to Patricia.
Thank you, Erica. And let me be honest with you guys. I didn't, first of all, didn't think I was going to be on camera today. So I'm not dressed up. And I don't have this fancy sign behind me. And I also have to be honest with you about this. After I submitted my bio a couple of days later, I got a notice from Amazon Publishing that I had gotten a royalty check or a royalty deposit for 4 cents. So I now have made a little bit of money. So let me tell you, this is the bottom line here. If you're here for a seminar on how to publish children's books and make a living and quit your day job, no, you're not in the wrong spot. That starts in the third hour. Okay. So just hang on for right now. We're going to talk about a much more interesting topic. We're talking about Social Security. So I think if we could start the slides, that would be helpful. I don't know how I can see the slides. Oh, wait, here they are. So I think that we could start here with this. And like I said, I didn't know I was going to be on camera. So I guess I'm the picture for you of the story. Social Security is not just for old people. And if you're not personally receiving Social Security, it's probably a pretty boring topic for you. But let me tell you a story. Um, when I was a baby lawyer, and I went to law school late, so it's not been that many years ago. And I practiced with my husband, as you were told. He also practices independency. He calls me one day and says, honey, I'm bringing home a kid. We don't have kids at home. He, oh, are you hearing echoes from me? I'm sorry. I saw that note come up. Is everyone hearing them, or is no? Okay. All right. I'll keep on. And anyway, my husband calls and says, I'm bringing home a kid. He doesn't have anywhere else to go. Are you okay with it? We didn't have kids at home. And of course, I said, I'm okay with it. He had been in court. The kid didn't have anywhere to go. And so we took this young man who had been in some trouble and no group home would take him. There was then some group home, like, I don't know, Panhandle or something. And my husband felt sorry for him. And he stayed with us in our gated complex in Madeira Beach. And then suddenly, all these relatives came out of the woodwork. And he had an aunt that wanted him. And we were like, okay, fine. And he was doing really well with us, but she was really pushing to keep him. We were waiting for the home study, and he had mother, and she was trying to get reunified. She didn't live in state. Not sure. I don't recall what the real problem was, but the whole deal was that he'd been disrupted from a grandmother, and an aunt wanted him, and there had been some kind of a negotiation between the two of them because this child came with a Social Security check. So, Social Security is kind of valuable. That's what I'm telling you. Social Security is pretty valuable, and we can keep going on the slides here, Erica. I don't know how to make them go forward, but if you would go forward, Social Security isn't the I keep going. Keep going. It's not just for old people, and it's not just the government's trying to take your money. I know that if you're young, you're paying in, and you're worried you're not going to get it someday. I can't promise you are, but just keep going. With the slides, keep going. But um, societies since going back to ancient Greece have been providing Social Security, or not the Social Security, but they have been providing benefits, care. It's a societal contract, and to care for those who are most vulnerable, people who can't care for themselves. And back in the United States, we go back with a societal contract, so to speak, back to the Civil War. When men came home on both sides, from the war, there were widows, there were men who were injured, had limbs blown off. The federal government, the society, who was the federal government, got a fund going for widows and injured to help take care of people. It was only 90 years ago that we got together and decided that we needed a formal payment, and it has Erica, if you would go on to the next slide, it has kind of come together in the last 90 years, and it's changed what they pay for and what they don't. But what I'm telling you is Social Security is not a new concept, and it is very valuable. The benefits that they make available in this very dry, very long, and if you want to read it, I welcome you to read it. I have not read through all of it myself, but it is what they call, and this is old age insurance benefit. Now, that is the last time we are going to use in this presentation the words old age. I'm going to be calling it retirement benefit from here on out. Disability insurance benefit, wife, husband's insurance benefit, survivor's benefit, child's insurance benefit, and a widow and widower's insurance benefit. I know I don't have to read these slides to you. I'm just going to point out to you, I don't know what the difference is between a wife and a husband's insurance benefit and a widow and widower's insurance benefit, other than I'm not sure really, but I'm sure there is one. But okay, next slide, Erica. Okay, so I know now you're sitting there thinking to yourself, this is dependency law. I practice that. I practice education law. I practice dependency law. I practice whatever law you practice. So what does Social Security have to do with my practice? And I'm going to ask you to think about it for just a second. And next slide. And then I want you to think about what needs your clients may have and who you may represent. So if you're practicing independency law, do you represent the parents? And are they unable to work? Are they unable to work due to a disability or mental health issue? Now, mental health issue is often, it is considered a disability, and you have to look at what they call the listings, and we'll get to that a little bit further down. And you also want to look at who is receiving benefits already. When a case opens, or even during a case, because it could be one of many people in the child's life or in the parent's life. The child, it could be the parent or the step parent or the adoptive parent or the grandparent, in some cases the step grandparent. So you just really need to consider who is getting that benefit. We want to make sure we're covering all of it. So if we could go to the next slide. We're going to look at what the benefits are for children, and the benefits are different. I'll just go through this first. Okay, so here's the bottom line. We have benefits for children that are based on what they get from an individual who already or who is entitled to get benefits. And we have benefits for children based on their own disabilities. They're two different things and two different definitions of a child. So the child of an individual, and the reason I put child in yellow is because we have a definition, and we'll show that to you, of a child of an individual entitled to retirement. Now, this does happen, and I'm going to tell you a story about this. I had represented a young man who had been he'd been living with a couple who had been his guardian ad litems, and they went into a nursing home. They were getting Social Security. They went into a nursing home, and they left him home alone. And he was taking care of the family bills. And the nurse from the nursing home ended up going to the house and trying to take care of this child who was he was 16 or 17. I don't remember exactly the age, but she was really appalled at the conditions, first of all, that he was living in. The fact that the father was getting the money and only giving this kid a little bit of money to live on, go down and get groceries. The kid had to go down to the store. The child was being homeschooled by the people who had adopted him, and he was the conditions were just horrible. So he ended up in the dependency system and was adopted by the nurse who had saved him, basically. It was really a happy story. And and Erica will be talking about what happens when a child is adopted and does he get to keep the benefits. In this case, yes. I'm not going to give away the spoiler alert. So, but this ended up in a very happy story because there was a wonderful person who looked out for a child, and um, she even adopted another child that I asked her to take in. But it was a good story. So there, not all stories of foster care are bad stories. Um, and the other child is if it's an individual who is getting disability insurance benefits, child is entitled to benefits from that. A child is entitled to survivor benefits for an individual who dies as a fully or currently insured individual. Now, that means, bottom line of it, is somebody who's paid into the Social Security system. And that amount, the amount the child receives, whereas someone who's receiving retirement is pretty much a fixed amount. Someone who's receiving disabilities is a pretty much fixed amount. This amount is based on, well, disability, both of those are kind of based on how much money the person made. This one is definitely based on how much money a person made during the time they paid into the Social Security system. So if someone dies young and hasn't really worked much, if the parent dies young and hasn't really worked much, let's just say it's the parent, they aren't going to get a whole lot of money. Now, in the case of the child I told you about, the young man, these people that were in the nursing home were probably, I think, in their late 70s, and they had worked had both of them had worked, and both of them had had really good jobs, so he was getting quite a bit of money. So it varies greatly. And then the other time the child is entitled to disability payments is when the child has a disability, which we're going to go into. That's going to be the greater detail we go into. So moving on. This is the definition of a child, simplified definition of a child, when the child is getting benefits from an individual's benefits. And that's when the child is naturally born or legally adopted, stepchild for more than a year. It has to be more than a year prior to the application. And under certain circumstances, which means pretty much that the grandparent or step grandparent were taking care of the child, the child can get benefits under that from those people. Next slide. So one thing to look at is when a parent is receiving SSI or SSD income. And I just kind of repeated that. I apologize. But what we find is in dependency cases, and I don't know how other practices do it, but in dependency cases, it's common for parents to receive SSI income or income for disability for themselves. In a lot of cases, children may be entitled to a monthly benefit. And based on even after they're removed, they are entitled to a benefit. It is not the full benefit, and it doesn't affect their parents' benefit. It doesn't hurt to check into it. If you're an attorney for a child, if you're a guardian ad litem, it doesn't hurt to look into it. That's what I want you to take from this, the big takeaway. Never hurts to ask. It helps your child. So, and for parents, attorneys, it doesn't hurt to ask if your client, because it doesn't hurt your client either. Okay, so we've talked about this already. It is why a parent might receive this income. I told you about the child that where retirement, it is rare, but it does happen. It could be if the child was being raised by their grandparents. And disability insurance, that's when the parent has the inability to work, and sometimes they they are getting it because of mental health. Um, Sometimes it's because they've had there is a long listing of things they've had. We've had people with diabetes who've had limbs removed. I mean, it's just a variety of things, but they are entitled, you know, or at least the child could be entitled, and it doesn't hurt to ask. Bottom line. Okay, so next slide. So now we're going to here's some practice tips for you. You're going to get a copy of these slides, so you don't have to write all this stuff down. But the courts will ask at times. Most of the courts ask for a source of income from the parents when they're at shelter and qualifying for free counsel, or sometimes they're at a case plan conference or staffing, and it comes up, and the source of income comes up, or they have most parents have to have a source of income, a legal source of income, so that will come up, and that is one way you will know without having to get into some confrontational thing about you going and asking the parent if you represent a child, or if the parent just says, I can't work because I'm what XYZ, and you can ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. You can ask the other person's attorney. Anyway, going on to the next. Now, survivor benefits, as we talked about, that's a little bit different. The child is entitled to survivor benefits from a deceased person who qualified, and it even from a grandparent under certain circumstances. And that's if that person was supporting them. Right, next slide. And here, this is another practice tip. The death of the relative or parent might be the cause of the removal. So that information to get you started on looking into it might be contained in the shelter petition. And I always ask, if there's a situation where there's a relative placement breakdown, I always ask if there are deceased parents, if there's deceased grandparents, if somebody died. It's always the best part of the story is if somebody died. Not really the best part, but when you think like a novelist, you always want it to be that something exciting happened. And we will go on to the next slide. And I'm going to give you a sample case. And this is based off one of my cases, which is far more complex, and the kids had much more names that were much closer in to each other. So we got three sisters, Angie, Becca, and Cindy. And their mother was an artist, and she had some mental health issues. And she died of cancer a couple of years ago. So Angie, who's the oldest, she's 19. She lived with her maternal grandma, Donna, since she was 10. And her father was unknown. Second child, Becca, she's 14. Her father lived in another state with his new family, and she never really knew him, and she's not interested in going to see him. But Becca had lived with mother and Cindy, the baby, and Cindy's father until her mom got sick. And then when mom got sick, she went to live with their grandma Donna and Donna's paramour, Grumpy Grandpa, which we're calling Grumps, and Angie. And then baby Cindy stayed with the father during the mother's illness and death. And there was no department involvement. So my question is anyone entitled to SS benefits, and what type? And you can put your answers in the Q&A? Or the chat, whichever. I don't know,
Yeah, for
Eric,
this
if you
one,
could.
the chat might be the easier option for this one.
Okay. I don't know if I could see anything, but oh wait, here's chat. Oh,
So somebody did answered on the Q&A. They put in entitled to SSA.
okay. Which child? Let's see. Survivor benefits from Donna. That's correct. They are entitled to survivor benefits from Donna. Who is entitled? Um,
Now we have another answer. It's all get survivor benefits. Somebody else answered Becca and Cindy.
okay. Okay. Well, Becca as a survivor of Donna. Donna is still alive in this scenario. Becca and Cindy would get survivor benefits from mom if mom had paid any money into the system. Um, she is, as an artist, it's if she made any money, then Becca and Cindy would get survivor benefits. Okay, now let's go to scenario 2 where we change it up just a little bit. Okay, now Grandma Donna was the CEO of a major corporation, so she made some big bucks. And she died of a stroke just 1 week before she was supposed to marry Grumps at her mansion. She dies intestate. After she dies, Becca lives with her older sister and Grumps. But Grumps doesn't like the young teen bee, Becca. He sends her to live with her best friend's family, and best friend's family lives in a motel while Angie and Grumps remain in Donna's mansion. The best friend's family calls DCF. The department shelters Becca with the best friend's family parents and pay them to care for her. Now, does this change the benefits outlook?
We have multiple people saying no in the chat and
Okay,
another Q&A.
okay, it does actually, because for Cindy, it does not. Cindy is not entitled to anything more than what she was getting because Donna was raising Becca and Angie. Becca is definitely entitled to survivor benefits from Donna. Angie is possibly entitled to survivor benefits from Donna, depending on whether she meets the criteria of going to school, and it's a possibility. It's certainly worth looking into. Okay, so it's something definite that definitely the young teen bee Becca, you would look into this for her and you would you definitely would look into it, and she would. I see somebody says Becca as a survivor of Donna. That's correct. Okay, so let's go on, and we're going to talk about now um, when the child is disabled. So here's the bottom line. This is where we're going to do most of the work in dependency. If you're an attorney ad litem, you've been appointed under the statute that for a child who is either disabled or in some fashion who needs a special needs attorney. If you're if you're a special education attorney, you're working with children who are disabled under IDA, the IDS, individuals with disabilities and education. So we've got the CFR basic definition of a disability for children. And if the child is under 18, a child's considered disabled if the child's blind. That's pretty simple. Or has a medically determinable physical or mental impairment, or a combination of impairments that causes marked and severe functional limitations and can be expected to cause death, or has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. Okay, that's very dense. So we're going to go on to the next slide and we're going to break that down. Okay. And this is a different definition of who the child is than the one we looked at before. This child, in this case, of their own disability, has no connection to another person. This is just a child. They cannot be married. They cannot be the head of household. They have to be under age 18 or under age 22 and a student regularly attending school. But this can start at birth. So let's go to the next slide and talk about the listings. Now, I don't know if you've heard of the listings, and we have included it in the packet because it's almost 300 pages, and that's only the listings for the children. But I'm going to tell you, the medically determinable is objective medical evidence from an acceptable medical source. It's got to be from a doctor. It can't be what Grumpy Grandpa says. I think she's got a mental problem. That's not medically determinable objective medical evidence. I mean, I think that's pretty evident. It has to be a physical impairment or a mental impairment or a combination of impairments. And again, we've given you the listings, but that is not all you need. So let's go on to the next slide. So you get your disability from the listings, and it has to cause a marked and severe functional limitation. And what is that? Well, they look at it, and the Social Security, that's who I mean, and they are checking to see if many of these listings will say, okay, if the child has these certain limitations, and most of our kids, I think, have disabilities that are not so much physical as they are mental health issues. But as my husband says, all God's children have ADHD, at least the ones in dependency. Is ADHD enough to get disability? It's not in the listings exactly that way, but we have certain things that are in the listings. And the listings where they talk about neurological disorders, they talk about autism spectrum. you have to have, so it's kind of like a Chinese menu, something from A, something from B, something from C. And we're going to go on to the next slide because we're going to talk about the functional equivalence. So we go back to the listings. If you have a listing that says, okay, this child has to meet A, B, and C, and I'm just going to use autism spectrum for one. If it says they have to have A, B, and C, or a psychological disorder, let's just use general terms. Psychological disorder, A, B, and C, then, and they may meet A and B, but not C. Then the Social Security will look at the whole child and how all of the child's diagnoses and functioning impact his or her daily life and abilities. And they look at it by age group. And I'm going to tell you, this is the funny part. When they're talking about it, in the writing of this, they in the functional I've given this to you in the packets. They write about it in the age 1 to 2. They put, you will be able to do this. You will be able to walk or not walk or whatever. Anyway, they address it to the person as if a child of 1 can read this, especially a child with a disability. Um, and going on here, the functional equivalence is a very important tool for our children dependency system, but it's very nuanced, and it requires putting together more than one of our children's diagnoses. We all know, anyone who represents children, anyone who's been in the dependency system for a while knows our kids have more than one diagnosis usually. And some of them may have borderline diagnoses, and sometimes we have to wait until we get uh you know neuropsychologicals. We have to wait till we get ADOS testing. We have to wait till we get IQ testing. Whatever we have to wait for, it may be, and may have an IQ test of 70. Okay, well, that's just kind of borderline. Maybe it's 69. And then we have to wait for a neurological test. So if we take 69, which is not quite 69, 70, we could have maybe, I'm going to give you an example here. I had a child that had 4 IQ tests in 4 years. 2 of them were over 70. 2 of them were 60-ish. And nobody had tested her for ADOS. Nobody had tested her for, I guess she was diagnosed with explosive disorder, but nobody had tested her for any of the other testing that, like, any of the other disabilities of learning, dyslexia, or any of those things. So she was denied both Social Security and the and for persons with disabilities, until we had somebody that knew how. So thankfully, in my circuit, we have wonderful people who handle it at our CBC level. So they helped out with this one. They did this application, and they did it a great job. But what I'm telling you here, the bottom line is, if you're the lawyer for the child, if you're the lawyer for the guardian ad litem, you may want to be involved in this and help out, because honestly, busy case managers, they get overwhelmed. This is a lot of paperwork. You're going to need their help getting the documents together, the medical reports you need to get them from the case managers. And if we could go back one slide, Erica, um, what the department or the Social Security looks at. Sorry, not the department. Social Security looks at. They look at it by age group. They look at how it functions their daily living and their abilities, and they look at it with the emphasis on how the child acquires and uses information, how they attend and complete tasks, how they interact and relate with others. And that's not just, that sounds like it's just an autism thing, but it's not. It's it goes with all of the testing, and then how they move and manipulate objects, how they care for themselves, and how their health and physical well-being is. So they look at overall health as well. They're looking at children who are babies that are neurologically impacted by mothers when they're born addicted. They're looking at 15-year-olds who have been um, the have been impacted by not ever being able to be functional in school. Um, Sometimes that's never been looked at when the child gets into the dependency system. So I think this is a good time for some questions and answers, and I've seen some in here.
Yes, there was one earlier in the chat. Let me look it up. Maybe this question is for later, but I'm gonna read it out loud. And it's, can medically complex children under the age of 18 become eligible for any type of Social Security benefits if the parent's income is higher than the FBR?
I don't I don't know what FBR is. Is that
I don't believe the answer is yes. I believe that it's not, but I'm happy to do some research. I apologize, Patricia, for stepping in on that one. I believe the
no?
answer
That's okay.
is no, because they are going to deem parents' income, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But I'm happy to do some further research because I know this issue does come up for certain families. Are
Yeah,
there any others, Jorge, before we kind of move on, or?
Not pending. And
Okay.
I actually clarified that FBR stands for Federal Benefit Rate. I was Googling it, but she beat me to it. So Federal Benefit Rate.
And
And
I'm
oh
it's
writing
just,
this down.
yeah, I don't think they are. I think that generally SSI for children is based
Mhm.
on the parent's income. It doesn't matter
Unless they're in
how
child
medically
welfare. Correct. And it depends, and if they're on child welfare. So,
yeah.
um, okay. All right. So if
there's one more question that just came in, and it's, where can we find examples where functional equivalence has been found? Where does the case law or admin decisions live?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I will look that up.
Yeah, we can
And
definitely look that up. And I know I usually pull what they call the POMS, the Social Security POMS, and I wish I knew what that acronym means right at this second. But a lot of like decisions and how they handle certain things live in the POMS. And I can also pull some of that research separately. But that's where I've typically gone. If I have a question about a case and I want to pull, I typically start through the Social Security POMS, which are online. I know we're cutting a little bit into time, so I'm not going to fly through the next slides, but we are going to talk sort of quickly. The first thing I'm going to mention is you notice this is not a beautiful drawn graphic, so this is something that I brought in. But we're going to talk about application for benefits, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about more specifically about and Patricia already mentioned this, but just kind of to get us back for my section, right? So they can apply for SSI, which is income-based program, income eligibility. We'll talk about that. Obviously, we talked already about survivor benefits, and we also talked about what is referred to as SSDI, right? So that is where children are receiving benefits from a parent who is receiving their own disability. And I also like to throw in the Medicaid, right? Because a child can come into child welfare with their own Medicaid, and it could be lots of different types of Medicaid. But if I see a child coming in, and someone's receiving Social Security, I typically know that that Medicaid is connected to that Social Security. It kind of does make it a little bit easier, when the child's coming in. And just very briefly, I'm not going to click on these links because my computer will definitely freeze. This is just a link to Social Security Administration, which again, we can find the POMs in there, we can find the applications in there, paper and online. We also do have here a quick link to the central, what they call the DCF. Sorry, that should say DCF. It says CF, but operating procedure for the master trust. And we already had a separate training on master trust that I highly encourage you to watch if you haven't already, that we had. I think it was just a couple of months ago, but it does talk a lot about kind of just like the ins and outs about what happens when the child actually comes in to care. So this is for the initial application. So let's say the child comes into the system, the child we think may qualify for Social Security. So how does this actually happen, right? So the CBC case management organization is typically who is what we call the point of contact, and they typically manage the application process, or at least that has how I have seen it with the CBCs that I have worked with, across the state. But again, maybe some areas do it differently, but this is typically how we see it. So the child case manager will gather the documentation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And then the DCF will typically serve as a representative payee once benefits are approved if they're in licensed care, right? So we'll talk about if they're not in licensed care. And then parents are generally not a part of the process. They generally don't apply once the dependency case has been initiated. I've not seen parents really participate in that. I've seen them not really as part of that process. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you need, right? Because Patricia mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's a lot of document gathering, right? So before the application actually gets filed, we need the child's birth certificate, right? A copy of the child's Social Security card or their number, medical records. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about this. Medical records, psychological evaluations, school records, right? They're going to ask for school records because as Patricia mentioned, right, there's a lot of the kind of the functional equivalents, like how are they compared to their peers in school settings, and so a lot of it will be found in their school records. Placement history and also court orders, especially if CBC is applying on behalf of the child. They're going to want to see like who's got custody of this child, like what's going on. And so the key to approval, as I put here on the bottom, is thorough medical and psychological documentation demonstrating a disability. And again, we're going to talk about a little more specifically now, right? So when we talk about medical records, right, we're talking about hospital records. Was the child born injured? Does the child have CP, cerebral palsy? And so typically that means we'll have hospital records, right? Was there an injury to the child upon birth? Or physician records. Is the child receiving services through CMS? Typically, there will be a nurse care coordinator or a social worker that can help folks locate all of the physician records. But right, we'll need physician records, hospital records. If they're getting if they had psychological evaluations, we're going to want to get our hands on that. School records, IEPs, 504s, psychoeducational, and that's a fancy word for school testing, right? FBAs, which we still have functional behavioral assessments, but they used to call them BIPs. And I have recently found out they don't call them BIPs in school anymore, or at least in my local area, they don't. They call them now positive behavior plans. But those are the BIPs. And then essentially, sort of the BA services in school is what you'll get under the FBA and the positive behavior plans. And then obviously, report cards, progress reports. And it would be helpful to also have short written reports from teachers if that's possible. So this is just for like, gather all of this documentation, I say, before you even sit down and actually apply. Now, what about our younger kids, right? Younger kids are babies, right? So again, let's go back to medical records, right? When they're much younger, kids are going, every 3 months, 6 months, whether they're getting vaccinations or not. They're typically more medical records because of all those developmental milestone checks that are recommended by the Academy, what is it? The Academy Association of Pediatricians. They do a lot of those milestone checks. So again, hospital birth records and PPACs, right? PPACs are the specialized daycares for children with complex medical needs, kids with trachs, kids who really need to have nursing nursing care while mom and dad are at work or whoever's taking care of the child. Developmental pediatrician evaluation. So if the child goes to a developmental pediatrician, which is not uncommon for children with developmental disabilities to go to a developmental pediatrician along with a regular pediatrician, or early steps, if they've been evaluated by early steps, if they're 0 to 3, or I think it's 0 to 4 under new law, if that's already in your local area, or fiddlers. That's what we call, in our local area, we call it pre-diagnostic services. So that's the 3 to 5 age range. And again, preschool records. If they've been to early steps or fiddlers, they will likely have an IEP. Or if they're in early steps, we have I used to call them baby IEPs, but they're the IFSP, the Infant Family Service Plan. IEPs are 504s, again, ages 3 or up. And we are also looking for PTSD, OT records, right? Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. And again, let's look at short written reports from teachers. I don't know about your preschool, the preschool that my kids went to. I used to get like updates from the parents, or the not parents. I was the parent. Updates from the teachers, or we do like little like report card conferences and sit down and talk about what children that age group are supposed to be doing and like where is your child in comparison. Now let's talk about the timeline. Okay, so let's say someone sits down and submits the application. I highlighted 6 months if you can see. SSI applications typically take 3 to 6 months for the initial decision. And I highlighted and bolded 6 because I'm finding it's taking more like 6 months. Now, there is such a thing as an expedited application process, but that's if a condition is dire, so the decision might be faster. I mean, like, I hate to say things like childhood cancer. There, it doesn't have to be that drastic, but that's the first one that came to mind because that's the first instance where I have seen it. I did include the link here that gives you how you're able to apply under the expedited process. And again, or as you probably know, working in this area, if you get an appeal, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, that can extend the process by several months, sadly, if not longer. Okay, so let's say the application gets approved. This is my optimistic heart. You submit what I refer to as a perfect application, and I'm going to mention that for just a second. So what I have seen a lot in denials, and we are going to talk a little bit more about that, is I have seen the application asks sort of the same question in 2 or 3 different ways. I'll give you, I know of an application where the person submitted it and they were applying under intellectual disability and they put different different IQs in different parts of the application, and then they didn't know why they were flagged for a denial. I easily pulled the application, noticed the discrepancies. We fixed those during the appeal process, and person was approved. So if they are approved, what actually happens, right? So the monthly benefit payments begin, right? And it's going to depend on whether we're talking about are they receiving SSI, which is they have a disability and it's income, it's their income only, or is it receiving it through a parent, or are they receiving benefits, which is a completely different process if the parent is deceased, right? If the parent's deceased, it's the death certificate, the child's birth certificate, boom, approved. The child is automatically eligible for Medicaid. So this is just talking in outside of the child welfare context. Okay. DCF becomes the rep payee. Okay. And then most of the funds will go towards the cost of care if they're in licensed care. And you can apply for a waiver. And again, all of that is discussed in our master trust training that we recently did. But most of the cost, if you don't do a waiver, ask for that cost of care to be waived, then I would say typically $30 to $40 is left a month as quote an allowance for the child. So here we talked a little bit about placement, right? So if they're in licensed foster care or in a group home, then most of those funds will go towards cost of care. Again, can apply for a waiver. But if they're with a relative or a non-relative, the relative will typically receive that benefit instead, right? So a lot of times relatives are not going to be receiving I don't know what they call it today. It probably isn't called relative caregiver funds anymore, but they're not receiving that anymore, right? They typically will get the Social Security funds. And then just as like a little reminder, right? And what about when the child returns home? Well, the benefit returns home with the child. And it is appropriate, right, for parents to utilize those funds for things like paying rent, food, and utilities, that it's all appropriate use. Basically, that benefit, right, will follow the child. Now, again, when the child returns home, they are going to deem the income between the parent and the child. So at that point, it'll depend on the household income. And I don't think we've mentioned it some at this point somewhere in the presentation, but I do want to make sure it is clear that when you apply for SSI for a child who is part of child welfare, they are considered a household of one, right? So they're not taking in the income of the foster parents, they're not taking in the income, obviously, they're not going to take an income of a group home or anything like that. So for these types of benefit programs, just like many others for those in child welfare, it is a household of one. Okay. So let's just to talk about the scenario that the representative pay is not DCF, right? Let's say it's a relative, let's say the child is back home with a parent. So that representative payee, because the person is under the age of 18, receives the check for the benefit of that child, right? So they must use the check for child's needs. And they should keep records. I always recommend you keep records, but depending on your relationship, you don't have to do the annual accounting anymore, right? So no, they no longer require the following folks, right? The natural or adoptive parents of the minor child they live with, or the legal guardians of a minor child beneficiary that they live with. So I would still, just as a practical matter, I would still keep track of this stuff because I feel like the rules are constantly changing, and just to be safe, I would keep track of how I spend the funds, even if it is for things just like rent, food, utilities. I think it's important to keep track of it in case something changes and Social Security has that question for you. Now, if DCF is the rep payee, right, the money is placed into a master trust account and it conserves those funds for future use. It can be unmet medical expenses, education expenses. There are a lot of ways that the funds can be used. And there is, I'm trying to think if we put it in the master trust training, but there definitely is a way to find out like what types of expenses would be approved. And there are a lot of different types of expenses that can be approved. So let's say that the application is denied, right? Which we do see, right? 40% of initial applications are approved in Florida. This does include the adult, though. I wasn't able to get the data specifically for children's applications as to what was adult versus children. But about 40% of initial applications are approved, which means 60% are denied. So first things first, read the denial letter carefully, right? Note the date on the letter as well as the date that it was received, because for you to file any kind of appeal is 60 days from the denial notice. Here is going to be a practice tip that I just want to make sure I put out there. Ask the question about who is receiving the letter. Ask the question about, is it someone at the CBC point of contact? Is it the case manager? I want you to ask this question as soon as the application is filed, because you want to make sure that you're constantly checking in with that person. I have heard of horror stories across the state where like the mail is being received by someone at the CBC. They're mostly working from home. There's like a telephone interview, there, whatever, something is going on, and nobody realizes it until after the date is due. That's obviously a huge problem, right? Because that will lead to a denial. So I'd ask that question right off the bat, like, who is the actual point of contact for the Social Security application, and how often, like, can you check them, or please, please, please keep an eye on that. Most SSI denials occur to lack of detailed medical evidence, which again is not hard for children in child welfare, right? You might be like, well, I mean, it's obvious that Tommy has a disability. We're going to apply for Tommy. Well, we need to make sure that you're submitting all of the medical evidence. I'd rather you hold the application for a month and make sure you have all of the documentation than just file the application because you're filing the application because you're likely going to get a denial. Or also insufficient documentation of what we call functional limitations. And that website on the bottom gives you the links as to the different approval letters. Okay. So, all right. So there are lots of different layers of appeals through the Social Security Administration. And the first one is the reconsideration. So this is basically where the application is reviewed again and you can submit new evidence. But it's basically a file review. You refile your request, you might submit your new evidence, and they're just basically doing a quick file review. There's no hearing, there's nothing else. It's just additional information and the file review. Then the next level would be the administrative law hearing. This is an actual hearing. As you can see, it could be in person. It could be, I loved other options here, right? Agency video, audio, online audio, phone audio. The request must be filed within 60 days of the denial date from the reconsideration request. Again, look at the dates. Look at the dates the letter was sent. Please make sure someone's checking the mail. I know that sounds so simple, so elementary, but I cannot tell you how often I am seeing this as an issue of, oh, I didn't know that there was a denial. Oh, I thought you filed the appeal. Oh, that sort of thing. And typically, when you get the letter from Social Security denying it, it will actually tell you how to request a hearing. And there's sometimes I've even seen the form contained within the packet. Now, if you, sorry, let me go back for a second. So this is an actual hearing, right? This is going to be an administrative hearing. You'll be able to see the file from Social Security. You'll be able to provide evidence, all that sort of good thing. So just think of it as like a regular, what we call administrative hearing. If you get an unfavorable decision there, and that is typically where I see folks getting their approvals is at the ALJ status, then you can also do what we call the appeals council, and they will examine your case and determine whether to, check this out, grant, deny, or dismiss your request for a review. So there, it's kind of like an appeals court. They're like, wow, we'll see if we even want to hear your case. And again, this is again 60 days. It's 60 days, 60 days, 60 days after the ALJ issues their ruling. And then if they decide to hear it and still deny the application, or if they don't want to hear it, they deny hearing it or dismiss it, then you can also file a federal court action. So it's basically a civil action against Social Security. It must also be filed within 60 days. So I don't know how many times I've said 60, but I'll probably say 10 more times. Um, and that is a regular, I hate to say a regular federal court case, but that's pretty much what it is. Typically, we see folks do the first two levels to reconsideration and the ALJ hearing and pretty much stop there. Okay. I'm going to talk very quickly about what we call the redetermination as I'm checking time. The redetermination. So this is a really critical transition point for youth turning 18 because here, and we're going to look at a chart in just a second. Here's the difference, okay? They are now evaluated under what they call the adult standard. So I call it the adult standard and the child standard, and they're extremely different, okay? And this is, here we go. Here's my practice tip. It is critical to know who is receiving the Social Security paperwork. I am working with a lot of youth who are 18, between the ages of 18 and 21, okay? Somebody is submitting the redetermination application. I'm not sure, I don't necessarily know who it is, but I can tell you I have had a number of clients across the state who they said they submitted the redetermination paperwork. Nobody knows where the copy of it is. Nobody has seen it, or it got filed and they submitted something to court saying, oh, we submitted the appeal, and then a year and a half later, it turns out no appeal has been filed. So I think it's extremely critical to ask time and time and time again, who is receiving this paperwork from Social Security? And here's what we're going to talk about. So here's the difference. So a lot of times children will get approved under the child standard and not under the adult standard, right? And so here's the difference, right? I always like the easy way that I try to describe it, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, is it's children being compared to their peers, right? How are they in terms of how they're functioning? And Patricia talked about this a lot in terms of their peers. And it really isn't about their peers, as I just learned today. It's more about their age group, right? Like how are they functioning compared to their age group? Versus the adult standard is very different. The adult standard, they're not looking at any of the childhood diagnoses. They're not looking at that paperwork. It's not like the paper file is following them. Nope, nothing, not at all. They have just, are not even looking at that at all. To them, it's a brand new application because the standard now is whether a medical impairment prevents them from substantial gainful activity. It's the SGA is the big thing. And it doesn't matter if the condition is largely the same and isn't going to improve and hasn't approved. If My own brother, as an example, he has an intellectual disability. His IQ hasn't changed since he was 9 years old and first diagnosed with an intellectual disability. My brother's now 35. That hasn't changed. He still gets reevaluated every 3 years to see if it has changed. So it didn't matter that he was receiving it as a child. It didn't matter that that diagnosis had happened. To this day, every 3 years, they check to see if his IQ has changed. So this is a good spot. I know to see if we have any kind of quick questions, Jorge. I know we're at
Yes.
1:10, so I want to be respectful.
Yes, so there was one question in the Q&A that I believe was answered. The question was basically, do most cases get denied? And you mentioned like 40% of the cases are approved. And it was followed up
Mhm.
by how long does it take to get a hearing? I know you mentioned that the initial decision usually takes from 3 to 6 months, but I know like a hearing, like how, if assuming it's denied, there's an appeal, how long do you usually get for a hearing?
Oh gosh, I have seen them within 6 months. I've seen them longer. I'm trying to think of my last one. Because I haven't had to do any lately. And I'll give that little practice tip. I don't do it all the time, but there are times when I will do the application with the client myself. I hate to say this, but sometimes I find that when we assist and we do something, I call it the perfect application. If I submit the perfect application, not only do I know what was submitted right, I know the whole process versus just getting in on the appeal piece, but I also find that we can help in making sure the application is consistent. And so I haven't gotten in a denial in a while, but admittedly, I haven't done an application extremely recently. Um, so I don't know if anybody else can chime in, if anybody's done any recently, because I have seen differences, big differences between pre-COVID and post-COVID, but so far I've been doing okay on those. Do you want to chime in, Patricia?
Um, I have not done a hearing in a long time. I can't really give an idea.
Okay. No problems, no problems. All right. So I'm getting
Here's
close to my
another
time before oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jorge. Go ahead.
We do have a few other questions that I wanted to ask you, like, do you prefer that we hold them towards the end, or do you want to address them right
I want to make sure we get through the slides. If folks can just
now?
hold on to the end, I promise we'll get to them. I'm so very sorry. This is such a heavy, long topic. So my apologies, but I promise, Jorge, thank you for letting me know. We'll make sure we get to them.
Let me just chime in here. We do have one question that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, and it's a very good question. How old can an assessment be to still be considered relevant and useful? And I I would think, depending on what the assessment is, as you mentioned just now, your brother, I think it was your brother you said, was about every 3 years the IQ test is asked to be done. I'm not sure what other assessments that they would need, and I think it just depends on the age of the child and what they're being assessed for.
And I would also like to chime in. I think any kind of, relevant information that you have, I think would be helpful. I will say and I did not put this in a practice tip, but if you ever have seen a presentation that I've given, I don't know how many times I can say this. Please do not provide a CBHA. I would not ever send a CBHA to Social Security only because I just think it has a lot of information that's not necessarily pertaining to the child. Um, I mean, it does have a lot of information, but I personally would not send a CDHA. But I think any new evaluation within a couple of years, or even if it can tell the story of like, um, and we can talk about the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, and it could very completely different training. But I think there are ways to tell the story of like this is a disability the child has. It's not environmental, that sort of thing. So I think I hate to give you the attorney answer, but I think it depends. I think it depends. But thank you, Patricia, for noting that question. Since I'm afraid to look at the chat questions because I'm sharing my screen and all that kind of good stuff. So adoption for
Right.
children with benefits.
Yeah,
So,
let me just add that there's another question that goes along with it, which is, does a post-18 application require post-18 documentation, or can you use old assessments? And I think that goes along with it, and I think that the answer is also dependent on, because sometimes you have to show that the disability has persisted through their lifetime or through a period of time. So the answer is yes and no, and it depends. An attorney answer. Um,
and I will also say that just so you understand, right, there are different types of programs that we're talking about here. So, for example, you can be an adult child with a disability, still collecting from your parents' disability or their retirement. And for those purposes, for Social Security, you have to be determined disabled under the Social Security definition prior to turning age 21, which, by the way, is completely different from APD, right? For APD, which is the Florida definition, you have to be 18 or younger, the records, right? They have to have a documented disability and some sort of documentation prior to the age of, 18 or younger, versus Social Security gives you all the way up to 21. So let's say, God forbid, someone's in a car accident and they suffer a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, and they're 20, that's going to count as a disability under Social Security, even though the Agency for Persons with Disabilities will not accept that. Anyways, I just wanted to point that out. So yeah, I absolutely think you could use evaluations from under the age of 18. Social Security isn't going to pull if they were receiving disability, excuse me, SSI as a child, or they're receiving benefits as a child based on their disability. They're not pulling their child's records and being like, oh, well, we're going to add this to the adult application. No, I would say, yeah, I would say provide it again. I think, there's nothing to hide, right? Like, we believe the child qualifies or the young adult qualifies. Let's provide them what they're asking for. I just had my little like soapbox moment about CDHAs because I just don't think that is helpful. And I don't find that the folks who actually complete CBHAs are doing the right types of testing that even Social Security would even consider. So anyhow, that's why I mentioned that. Okay, I want to keep going because I want to make sure we finish on time. So for adoption of children with benefits, and again, I'm happy to answer questions outside of the training if this becomes helpful. Since SSI it's needs based, right? So it includes the assets and income of the household. So when the child is in child welfare, and I did actually put it in here. I'm happy to report the children are considered a household of one, right? But that ends with the adoption. After the adoption, the adoptive parent is going to be counted, and we call that deeming. So when they apply, let's say you're going to apply for SSI and the child has been adopted, they're going to look at the income of mom and dad or whoever, mom and mom or whoever's actually adopted a child. They're going to look at the household income to determine the income eligibility portion. So even if the child has a disability, if the household no longer qualifies under their income, they're not going to get it. So there's possible outcomes, right? Possible outcomes after an adoption. The SSI continues, again, if the adopted family income qualifies. SSI may be reduced. And I always used to say, an SSI of $1 equals Medicaid. And I understand there's Medicaid, under adoption, and I'm talking outside of a child welfare perspective, but $1, as long as you get $1 of SSI, you're going to get that Medicaid attached to it. So SSI, or you're going to have that SSI terminates due to the excess household income. So it's not the adoption that automatically terminates the SSI. It could be the income piece, if that makes sense. So if a child that receives Social Security benefits due to a deceased or retired parent, adoption generally does not terminate survivor benefits, and I have a story about that in just a second. The child can continue receiving benefits from deceased biological parent record. And also same thing happens with retirement, or if the parent is receiving Social Security benefits due to a disability, the child can continue receiving benefits even after the termination and the adoption is completed. So here is my story. I have a client who is 21 years old. We kept getting letters, like we knew he was receiving Social Security benefits, but it kept like we got a letter that said SSI, and then we got a letter that said SSA, and then he started to get Medicare, and I thought, whoa, like, okay, I wasn't sure. Tried to make an appointment. Fun fact, friends, it's very hard to make an appointment to go to Social Security. In fact, they told us on the phone to go in person to make the appointment for the future, which made no sense. Anyhow, we were able to make an appointment. We went last week. sat down with the person working at Social Security, and she was able to explain that my client was still receiving death benefits on behalf of his biological mother who had passed away when he was, I think he was 9 or 10. And so I will say one really nice thing about that visit with Social Security, because we had lots of questions for them. We had questions for them, about what he was getting and like his Medicare and who was paying for his Medicare premiums. And we just had a lot of questions. And so we thought it was easier to go in person. But I'm going to give you just a little bit of something that I think kind of made me take a step back. It's super quick. Is he said to the person working at Social Security, I don't remember my biological mom's name. Can you please tell me? And I looked at him and I was like, you don't remember? And he's like, I don't remember. So because she had passed away, the person at Social Security told him his mom's name. And I can't tell you how elated he was. As soon as he heard her name, he goes, that is her name. And like on the car ride home, he kept saying, wow, I actually know my mom's name. So, and it made him, I know that story is really not related to much except to say that it is a positive story I have about Social Security recently, and also the fact that he now knows that the money he's receiving every single month, it ties him to his biological mom. Like it really did. It has done something for him just to feel, I think, that sort of family connection for him. Because unfortunately, his adoption story is not a positive one, but that connection for him was real. So I'm actually really thankful. The lady said, "Yep, she's passed away. I'm able to release that information to you." So keep that in mind that there is a possibility that if you go and the rights have been terminated, that Social Security will not tell you the name of that parent. But anyhow, so really this isn't a weighing options. Are we going to use the SSI or are we, in the adoption subsidies? Sometimes both can be received, but it's not common. I typically find that parents will opt for the adoption subsidy versus the SSI. It just depends on the situation. So families need to have all of the information so that they can determine if they are going to be able to pursue both or not. But I have seen families that say, sat down, discussed it with them, and most families have decided to take the adoption subsidy. But it's uncommon, but it can happen that they receive both. I did put a quick Q&A in here. I don't know if there's anything really quick I can answer, Jorge, or if we should go ahead and keep on going. We've got one more section that we want to try to wrap up.
Yeah, keep going because I do see some questions coming in. We can try to tackle
Gotcha.
them at the end of time.
Gotcha. All right. Now turning it back over to Patricia.
Okay. I have already covered most of what actually, you've already covered most of what I was going to talk about. So we can just skip this one. And people can look at this in the slides that we send out. Again, we can skip this and I'll just talk about the ticket to work. The Ticket to Work is a program that Social Security has provided. It supports career development. It is really a simplified just version of they're giving disability benefits and people want to work. So it's free, it's voluntary, it helps people with disabilities move toward financial independence. And it connects them with services and support they need to succeed in the workforce. That is, if somebody is getting benefits, they and they want to work, they're going to give them training, they're going to give them an opportunity to be a successful member, what they consider successful, productive member of society, um, where they can, and that's more particularly, I think, geared towards young people. So that's why we've put it in here, because there are kids, young youths, as my cousin Vinny said, that don't want to just sit and collect Social Security just because they may have had some kind of a disability. They want to work, they want to go to school, and this will help them continue to receive their benefits and work and find some kind of a career they can have. And I'm going to give you an example of somebody that a case I have. I represented this young man, child, since he was about 10, and he recently he had a lot of issues with learning. He was had a lot of learning disabilities. It was looking like he wasn't going to graduate from high school until he was in his mid 20s, and he turned 18 almost 2 years ago. He was in extended foster care. He was working on in a great program on a farm, learning some skills, but having a little bit of difficulty. And he decided to leave extended foster care, go back with his parent. This is the kind of program that he would be ideal for him. And I've talked to him about it, even though, you know, my lawyering contract ended, my obligation, in my opinion, my to my kids that never ends. They're always my kids. And I've talked to him about this, that because he doesn't want to just sit around, and his mom may be collecting the Social Security disability, but he can benefit from this. He can continue to learn the skills he was learning at this placement. I think he never really had an idealistic. He wanted to either be a soccer player or I think it was, I don't know, basketball player maybe, or a plumber. And I'm just throwing that out there. I don't remember exactly, but he can benefit from this. Um, that's the kind of program it is. He can go to Social Security. There are companies that provide services for this. They are not-for-profit companies that provide training for people who do the ticket program, and you just have to just Google uh, Social Security's Ticket to Work, and I think that is really all I need to cover, so we can do the questions and answers, and that's it.
All right, folks. Let's see. I have been avoiding the. Oh, I should tell you about the handouts real quick. Sorry, apologies. Just so that folks know. Because I did want to mention this real quick, right? So this is a link to Florida Law Helps, and it talks about child SSI. I thought it was a really nicely well done handout that folks can use. I did want to talk about the 1696 form. So if you are working with a child, a youth who has, a Social Security issue, and you want to be able to communicate with Social Security on behalf of your client, you do have to do something called the 1696 form. It's basically what they call like a claimant's representative form. But fun fact, I didn't realize because they changed it in late 2024 that you have to have a registrant ID. So you have to, send paperwork online, or I think actually we had to mail it into them, and they said it would take 2 to 3 weeks. And by golly, did they take their full 3 weeks to give me my own rep number. So now I have a rep number that says I'm not going to take any income on any cases for any of my clients. And so now you have to include that registration number on the bottom of that form. So that was a new thing I learned recently. But now I have it, and then basically like I have my own login now to kind of like manage my own cases. So I'm still learning that process. But I did want to bring that up because I used to do this all the time with my clients. And now I went in there and I was like, I don't have a registrant ID. What is that about? Anyhow, and then we've also included for you all the listings and the functional equivalents for children. All right. We're almost at time, but let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can do.
All right, so I'm going to do a quick plug for the CLE code. I dropped it into the
Of
chat, but I
course.
wanted to make sure I read it out loud. It's 2601857N. It will go out via email, and you will be able to find it in the YouTube description as well. As I mentioned earlier, if you need a certificate of attendance, email me, and I'll get to it as soon as I can. I will be out tomorrow and Friday, so I may get to it next week, but I will definitely be working on it. So we do have a few questions. There was one that was answered by Patricia via chat. This is going back to the redetermination and who do we ask the questions to. in regards to the application, and the answer that Patricia gave in the chat was case management. Let's see what other questions. I'm gonna try to read the questions in the order that they came in. There's one question here in the chat. Does SSA consider income of guardian advocate when SSA denied SSI to child with autism because of parents' income, child will turn 18 soon, but parents will become guardian advocate.
I believe the adult, once they turn 18, they become a household of one. That becomes their household. So that the guardian advocate's income, I don't think comes into play. Please reach out to me if you find out differently when it all comes ahead. Please let me know because I would be interested in finding that out.
Here's another one is can SSA seize a child's SSI benefits simply because the child is temporarily placed with a wealthy non-relative family?
Whoa, say that again. I apologize. Hold on.
Yeah. Can SSA seize a child's SSI benefits simply because that child is temporarily placed with a wealthy non-relative family?
If it's through child welfare, I don't think so, but I would have to do research on that. I don't believe so. But I would have to do research on that because I'm assuming if it's part of child welfare, then the child welfare system placed them with that relative. I believe they still are considered, as long as their dependency case open, I believe they're still considered a household of one. But Jorge, I may want a list of these questions afterwards so I can actually answer people
Yeah,
that, like for Ms. Duque, her
sure.
question about the medically complex children. I want to make sure I respond to her on that one.
Yes, so I know we're at time. Let's maybe try to get one more. What I'll do is I'll
Sure.
send all the questions to Erica, and maybe I can include all of these in
Yes.
it for everybody that attended, and that way, because I think I see a lot of questions coming in. Everybody
Oh,
has my contact information, so they can also email me, and maybe we can put it all together as a document.
I was
Um,
going to say if we could
ready to
create like
go.
a Google Doc and add it to the handouts, and then that way
Yeah,
when we send out materials, maybe we could add it to that drive, and that way we can answer the questions. Now, I will let everybody know I am also out Friday, so if I don't get to these, I promise to get to them by Monday. But anyhow, yeah, we can do it that way. I think it's a great way to add all the questions that everybody sees into that Google Doc. But let's go ahead and
right.
do one
And
more if we can.
okay, so there's the last question that I'm gonna read out loud. So, if you need to do a federal court appeal, can you also reapply with SSA, or do you need to wait until the federal court appeal has been decided before you reapply?
Oh my goodness, that is a great complicated question I will have to look up because I think you can apply at any time, but I don't know I guess I'd want to know more. I hate to say that it depends, but I'd want to know why we're filing an application again if we're also going through the appeals council. So let me look into that one again also, but I've never
So the
gone to the
materials
appeals
folder,
council. Yes.
Erica mentioned the Google document. I will include that document in the materials folder. I already dropped the link into the chat, but you will notice that every time I send out an email or Zoom sends out an email or even in the YouTube description, I have a materials folder. That Google document does not currently exist, but I will create it and I will
Yeah.
start adding those questions. So I know a lot of us will be
Yes.
out this week, so we'll probably take a few days to get to
Yeah.
it, but I promise we will. And the next webinar for
Absolutely.
this series is April 15th. So be on the lookout. I will also include a link for the series. I dropped it into the chat as well. I will, if for whatever reason we miss a question in that Google document, just email me and I'll make sure that that question is included in the document so everybody can access it. So thank you, Erica, and thank you, Patricia, for joining us today and leading an amazing presentation on a very complicated topic. It's
Oh
like
gosh,
Social
yes.
Security benefits alone are very complicated. So when you mix in dependency, that makes it even more complicated. So thank you, everybody that joined us. And I know we're about 3 minutes over time, so I just wanted to thank everybody again and see you. I'll see you at the next one. Right.
Thank you all. Take care.